It's episode 5 of Aeolian Sands, and it's an exciting one. This is season 2. We're back, and as always, we've invested in brand new research, sparkling new stats, and data that will blow your mind. I think there's going to be some controversy this series too. Kicking off, it really is going to be kicking off big this week. We're talking climate change. Stay tuned for some shocking insights there. Also in the news, we'll talk about electric vehicles. And our under the radar topic looks at the fascinating world of concrete. Don't switch off. It's properly interesting stuff. Well, at least it is to the man sitting across from me. Mir, I'm pumped to be back with the podcasts.
Yeah, me too. It's been great. Looking forward to season 2. We're talking everything environment and nature. We've got some amazing results. The report's going to be out, and let's get into it.
Now, we had quite big heads the other day. Jess and her very nice team at Podster nominated us as one of their 8 outstanding podcasts to follow. So that was very nice. And there was a line that I just wanted to read out from the quote from that. This show is like sitting next to the smartest, most interesting people at a dinner party. Lovely comment. But what's your favorite dinner party topic?
Well, given the results that we've gotten, I think climate change.
Oh, I was gonna go a little bit sort of more off-piste with this. My favorite dinner party topic is anything to do with surviving a zombie apocalypse, because there's so much debate around that. It's like, well, do you escape somewhere? Where do you escape to? Do you have to get a weapon? Where would you go? Do you get a vehicle? Because probably the petrol stations are going to run out pretty quickly, so you need an electric vehicle. Oh, but wait, the power stations have stopped working. So there's a lot of debate around zombie apocalypse. It's a great dinner party topic.
Well, that's actually a good one. My favorite comedian, that's why he learned how to fly a helicopter. That's what you want in case of a disaster and a zombie apocalypse, because you just go straight up.
I mean, where would you go though?
Away from the zombies.
We're already getting off track straight away. I'd probably go to an island somewhere, preferably somewhere with lots of coconuts and fish around. You know, something you can survive off the land. But anyway, this week's big bold question. If you're new to this, we ask 1,000 people what they really think about an important topic. What's really exciting about this series of big bold questions is this season, they're powered by you. Whether it was via email, social media, or just conversations amongst the friends of duke+mir, these questions are what you wanted to know around environment and nature. And we're going to dive into real life questions, real life opinions of people in the Middle East. And boy, did we have some big questions. And let's kick it off. This week, we quizzed people in the UAE about climate change. It's obviously a huge topic, especially with COP28 coming up. And actually, maybe we should call it big, bold statements this week, because we asked people to agree or disagree with some pretty mega statements. And let me tell you what those were. So the first of them was, I think humans will find technological solutions and adapt to global warming. And we had 5 sort of options, everything from strongly disagree to strongly agree. The second of the questions was, I think climate change is inevitable and we shouldn't worry about it. And the third statement was, I think climate change is a hoax. Wow. I mean, these are pretty bold statements, and they didn't come from us. They came from you guys. So I think it's important to look at the results. So statement 1, I think humans will find technological solutions to adapt to global warming. Do we think people agreed with this? You know, UAE is a very tech-focused country, and let's reveal it. So 3/4 of people surveyed in the UAE, so 75%, they think that humans will find technological solutions to adapt to global warming. It's quite a lot of optimism there.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a good result. And I think that the optimism and the belief in terms of finding technological solutions or innovations, either to existing infrastructure or industry, but even future decisions and choices, I think that's a really, really good result. I'm pleased with that one.
Yeah, and you know, tech has solved other issues with the environment in the past. If we roll back sort of 30, 40 years, there was a huge issue with CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, and they were being used in all sorts of deodorizing sprays, things like that, industrial sprays, and created big old, sort of gap in the ozone layer, and that has kind of started to heal and repair itself with the reduction of those things. So perhaps technology and the adaptation of our lifestyles and behavior can have a positive impact. Now, one of the interesting sort of side points from this point, so young people seem to be the most confident in addressing the problems of climate change with technology.
Yeah, I mean, given their access to technology and how much it's embedded in their daily lives, I think they are possibly the biggest users, but also the people who are driving adoption at scale in terms of different technologies. They, study it all the time. They're, kind of when we were back in school or older generations, possibly we had maybe computer sciences or that weird computer tech class, maybe a bit of robotics with like mechano sets. That was as far as the robotics went in school. But these kids are now programming AI robots. They're learning about machine learning. They have a really strong understanding of the Internet of Things. So different tech devices across in buildings, water sensors, pressure sensors. So I think it's quite interesting that the tech that they're growing up with, it's easier for them to imagine the use cases to solve real issues such as issues in environment and nature.
It's interesting, and possibly there's a concern as well. If you are reliant upon technology solving problems, is it a case of sticking an elastoplaster, plaster onto the problem? Is that what's happening if you're using technology to address it? Or if you're a scientist or an engineer and you're looking at ways to solve problems of climate change, global warming, removing CO2 from the atmosphere, which we'll touch upon in a little while, perhaps that's really, really great that you're seeing young people coming through and having this kind of perception that technology really is the route to success when it comes to global warming. I think it can be seen in one of two ways. One thing which really stood out from the statements, this is around, I agree that climate change is a hoax. This was the statement. I think climate change is a hoax. 40% of people in the UAE agree that climate change is a hoax, and just 20% strongly disagree with that statement. Is it scary? Is it denial from people? What do we think is even going on here? What is a hoax? Is it how do people perceive that word? Fake news, hoaxes, it's kind of tying in together. It defined, in a sort of dictionary sense as a humorous or malicious deception. And as a verb, it's to trick or to deceive. So what we're reading into this is that people in the UAE, 40%, 4 in 10 people think that they have been deceived when it comes to climate change. I mean, I can't even imagine why.
Yeah, I mean, when we got that result, I think we had received this question. We were quite uncertain in terms of what the result would be.
I think a little bit nervous about using the word hoax as well, because it is quite a powerful word.
Yeah, and I think it's not only in the UAE but globally as well. I think there's so much polarization on a number of different topics, climate change being one of them. But it's really shocking actually that many people would actually agree that it's a hoax. And I'm not sure on which spectrum it is, because is it denial or is it ignorance? Because if it was ignorance, people would be, I guess we would have a higher percentage of people saying that they're somewhat uncertain or they're not sure, right? Or they somewhat agree. But to have such a large percentage of the respondents actually agree that it's a hoax is quite concerning. And I think another aspect to it is also, it's, this has kind of puzzled psychologists for some time. It's not only an issue that we face that clearly is an issue over here now that we've seen this result, but also it's a big part of discourse in other parts of the world as well. And I think, I guess the first kind of one thing that we could kind of dissect and talk about is how do we look at climate change as facts and connect them to values of individual people? Is it perhaps that because we live in the UAE and we're somewhat insulated, there's that saying that the last thing that a fish notices in a pond or a fishbowl is the water, right? Whereas perhaps they would be more inclined to say that a pandemic or a coronavirus like pathological virus is a bigger threat than environment, because we don't see the effects of climate change so rapidly.
Yeah, I
right?
mean, you're right. It's almost the analogy of the toad being put into the pot and it's boiling,
Exactly,
and if you heat it up gradually, I think that's a great analogy. And I think that it's interesting to look at who do people think is doing the deceiving. Why would they think that? And I think there is a certain economic happenstance or coincidence that developing nations are being told by developed nations, you can't use fossil fuels to power your economy, when that is exactly what has powered the wealth of those countries. That's exactly what they've done and are still doing. When you're looking at America, still huge amounts of fossil fuel usage. Europe, huge amounts of fossil fuel usage. Those developing nations of India, of Pakistan, of China, they're all being told, hey, don't use fossil fuels to power your economy, even though that's exactly what we've done for the last 100 years.
Yeah. Again, I think it comes down to the loudest voices in public discourse and discussion, right? I think it's also important to understand that there are two factors at play. One are kind of social factors, right? So that's everything from politics, status quo, belief in hierarchy, education, religion. These are kind of factors. But then also psychological. What are your personal beliefs, values? There have been a lot of studies, and psychologists are always kind of trying to understand how do we differentiate between, is it actual denial or is it ignorance? And for denial, they found that it was mostly motivated reasoning. People were finding ways to rationalize their individual values and beliefs versus climate change. So kind of an analogy would be, rather than looking at the facts and all the circumstances as a judge, they're more kind of approaching the topic as a defense lawyer, which already they're finding ways to reinforce their own bias or gut instinct that they have. But to your point about the apocalyptic nature or some of these claims that people have made, especially like very loud voices, you have a number of activist groups, like Extinction Rebellion. You've got, part of where you're from, you've seen Stop Oil, running onto the Formula One field recently at a flower show.
Yeah.
So again, this is also one way of turning people away from kind of losing sight of the facts and really kind of now associating with social structures.
Yeah, and I understand and I sympathize with people who want to really powerfully convey their convictions of wanting to protect the planet, wanting to protect the world from climate change and the devastating effects of rapid climate change. I studied a lot about climate change when I was younger, and I keep an active interest in this area. So it's interesting to see, what is the best way to communicate with people? We are communicators. We do this on a daily basis. What is it that we could communicate better? And the action of some of the protest groups, of trying to force an opinion onto people, is one of the worst ways to communicate with people. It's very ineffective, and it's going to push people the wrong direction. Now, to go back to one of the points you said about how people are sort of setting their mindset. There's a great article which features within our reports that we've written for duke+mir. It's written by a guy called Ep05, who's the chief data scientist at research.com. And he wrote this fantastic article about why people fail to believe things, even when faced with really, really strong facts. And there's one that's really applicable to climate change, and it's something called the avoidance of complexity. Now, our brains are hot-wired to make quick emotional decisions, and it stems back from when we had to quickly decide, when we were cavemen and women, whether to do something in a life or death situation. And in those high pressure environments, even a quick decision is better than a slow decision. Even if it's not 100%, a quick decision is generally better in those kind of situations. However, when it comes to climate change, our brains are still wired in the same way, and we still make those quick emotional decisions. And rather than considering long, complicated, rational scientific evidence, which is pretty difficult to really get your head around. And I spent years at university looking at this stuff, and even I'm confused by some of the arguments, and you have to really spend time going into these scientific things.
And adding to that, just sorry to interrupt, but adding to that, it's also the scientific community. There's a spectrum. They may agree on 100% of them agree on a certain level of climate change or contribution towards global warming, but then you have also within the scientific community and researchers, you have the extremes on the both ends as well, and usually those are the loudest or the ones that get headlines.
And that is actually another area. It goes slightly beyond that, but it's this concept of where there isn't a really solid answer. It creates confusion for people, and then they're very likely to just switch off from the argument as well. So that's another thing. Our brains are, when we made a decision, our brains are programmed to continually reinforce that decision, both subconsciously and consciously. So if you come to the wrong conclusion once, you're more likely to double down on that conviction. Politicians have realized that in recent years. They've realized that even in the face of overwhelming evidence that they've lied or they've done something dodgy, that actually, as long as they tell a really emotional message, as long as they really try and hit the emotions of their voters, it really doesn't matter what the truth is. And that's quite a scary thought. And there's certainly some very famous politicians out there right now, some of them perhaps running for office in a year or two, who have made these kind of claims in the past and have don't really care whether it's false or true. They just know that emotional arguments are strong. Now one thing I wanted to point out was the third statement. So the third statement was, I think climate change is inevitable and we shouldn't worry about it. Now 52%, so a majority of people in the UAE think that climate change is inevitable and we just shouldn't worry about it. And that figure was highest amongst 18 to 24 year olds, that Gen Z audience, with 60% broadly agreeing. So they are the least worried about climate change, and they think, let's not worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, UAE is a unique place. Maybe, again, it's phrased in a way that we think it's inevitable and they shouldn't personally worry about it. But perhaps they believe there are people, stakeholders, government, businesses, public, private sector that have the situation in control and are actively taking steps on their behalf because they're part of their social fabric and their society and their environment. So possibly they feel that it could be that the older generation has it in control, or it could be that they feel so they feel such a lack of control that they feel like no matter what they do, it's not going to bring about any change.
Yeah, these kind of results, they don't necessarily sit very well. They seem to be a bit of a paradox. People think that they'll find tech solutions to global warming, and yet there's a significant number who aren't even sure if it really exists. So it's kind of strange. People are confused. They're aware of climate change. They're aware of global warming. They maybe have a top line view on these things. But it's complicated. It's difficult to understand. They don't know if they can actually make a difference. They don't know who's responsible. Is it government? Is it private sector? Is it an individual action? If they think it's inevitable, well, maybe they're just putting the responsibility onto somebody else. And there was a couple of other surveys beyond this, and we want to point out that the study that we looked at was conducted by YouGov. It was 1,000 people across the UAE. But there were other studies done by Kearney in November 2022 that had kind of different results. They said that 77% of people are willing to make notable changes in their lifestyle. But then there was another study which was done a matter of months later, which was done by a collaboration between Veolia and Elabe, which I believe is a French research firm, which found that 35% of people in the UAE think we should change our lifestyles. That's totally different answers, 35 versus 77%. So we're getting mixed messages. And I think all of these things say, well, for individuals, look, I'm going to do nothing because I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to do. And they're not changing their lifestyles because it's not really manifested into actions. We're not seeing individuals do things differently. And I think we're going to touch upon that a little bit more across season 2 as well. But we do have something major coming later in the year, which is COP28. And that takes place from the 30th of November to the 12th of December here in the UAE. And communication around COP28 is going to be a key topic. We've got all sorts of different ways that we can tell some messages between now and those crucial dates, that fortnight period here in the UAE. How would you go about if you were controlling the whole of COP28, which I believe is being done by Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber? How would you advise him to communicate when it comes to COP28 and the messages they really want to get across, which is that people should take action around climate change?
It's a good question. And what would be really amazing is we would do this survey again after COP28, so next year. Also keep in mind that, I've been back in Dubai for over a decade now, and it's really the past couple of years where sustainability, the environment, improvements in terms of infrastructure, here at least where we live in the UAE, specifically in Dubai, but other Emirates as well, has improved, right? And people have expectations in terms of how businesses should behave, how infrastructure should be, etc. Now, with regards to COP28 is, again, for a common person or that 18-year-old sitting, possibly thinking about where to go to college, that's, it's so far away for them to be involved or to understand those conversations. I attended a summit recently, and quite a prominent stakeholder within the government, he actually said that, or his belief was that we actually shouldn't be pushing people to take individual action, because even if everybody takes a small individual action, the sum of that is not going to result in any incremental or actionable change.
That's a bit ridiculous.
And he put the onus, and right, I'm listening.
I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm listening to his point of view, and he put the onus on himself and stakeholders like him from large industry, businesses, government, public, private sector, where they have to make huge, whether in regulation, in licensing, in innovation, and in investment, in financing. But I think you can't, but why should it be one or the other? And that's, I think, what my request, or I see it both as a challenge, as an opportunity for businesses, for individuals, for opinion leaders to really get this message out that it's a collective effort, and you're only as strong. It's great that your company or your organization has announced its ESG commitments and is doing things for net zero, but clearly, as the survey demonstrate, if your 5,000, 10,000 employees are not in line and in tune and in 100%. Sync. And I think that's where it's really interesting. So this survey that we did is really how are people thinking? And the other part, the next survey the other part of the survey that we've done is how is this translating into actions? You mentioned that and I've seen different data points as well, the study from Kearney. I think that statement, nobody would disagree with that statement, right? The same way we say that I'm going to do 10,000 steps every day, or I'm going to eat less junk food, or I'm going to quit smoking. Everyone would agree with that. So that's point number one. I think how we think and how we behave disconnect. The gap between fact and values disconnect. And I think the messaging where you talked about emotions, right? I think very skewed towards fear rather than love, encouragement, and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I would just pick up on what you'd said about the gentleman who said, look, it's not really down to individual action. It all starts with individual action. It all starts with your kids at home. What are you doing at home? What environmental action are you taking? Are you going to the park with them? Or are you just letting them play computer games? Are you teaching them about the world around them? What kind of bird is that? Unless you've got a love for nature, a love for the environment around you, unless you're doing things on a daily basis, taking your family and to the recycling point to show them where to recycle things, whatever it happens to be, if you're not taking those individual actions in your own home, with your own family, and teaching the people around you, the community around you, and being part of that, then how can you expect people, when they become CEOs of companies, when they become sitting on board level positions, which are really the decision makers that are going to make a difference? I don't disagree with that statement that it is going to come down to governments and businesses at the end of the day making big decisions around what they're doing. Of course that's true, but it starts with the individual. If that individual who's entering a board level position doesn't really care, even if they've got to hit their mandated or regulated position of a company, they're not really going to really care about driving that forward, exceeding those targets, really trying to make a difference, because hey, it doesn't really matter what individuals do. That's why I think that was a fairly ridiculous statement to say that it doesn't matter what individuals do. That's the first step, the most important step, because without attitude changes, behavioral changes at an individual level, how can you possibly encourage people at a governmental or private sector level?
100%, I think. But I mean, to be fair, the audience was all leaders from the public and private sector. So possibly he was
playing it up.
Possibly, trying to get encouragement from the audience, similar like-minded people. But I think you're absolutely right. These 18 to 24-year-olds that feel a bit complacent in terms of climate change is inevitable and they shouldn't worry about it, right? Like you said, they're going to be people joining those organizations. They're the ones who are going to be looking for different solutions, and we have to. And I'm very excited, because I think COP28, besides what's going to happen over there, I think that's kind of a global meeting, and it happens every year, and we know how that's been progressing. We understand how the business of geopolitics and different moving pieces, it's beyond our control. But I think what the true opportunity and the benefit that we as everyday citizens, kids in school, is greater awareness, which possibly we've never really had. I think the UAE took a very good step, naming this year the year of sustainability. The late Sheikh Zayed was a huge advocate for nature, to a point where Elaine, his hometown, it's you're actually fined if you cut down a tree. The amount of trees and forestation projects that he's done, he was very, very close to nature and the environment. But that comes from, like, as you said, being out in environment, because then you notice the garbage on the street, then you notice the amount of plastic you're using, then you notice how to treat animals and how to have respect for other living things beyond human beings.
And we've got a lot of exciting insights for the rest of the season, where we will be diving deeper into the actions that we're actually taking here within the UAE. Now, if you'd like to read more on this, you can head over to duke+mir.com, check out the research section there. You'll find all of our interesting insights reports there. And this particular one on environment and nature, do dive over to duke+mir.com. Love to hear your thoughts and feedback on it. And you can also send any comments over to info@duke+mir.com. Now it's time for In the News. This is where we chat about some big things happening in the world around us. Mir, what have we got this week?
So keeping it on topic and around the big bold question, Obviously, COP28, we're seeing a number of large announcements in the UAE, but also within the region. And I thought the first one, this is personally very exciting for me, as you know, or possibly a lot of my friends know, but people probably don't know. I don't drive. I consciously make an effort not to ever drive. I'm a huge believer in public transport. I walk whenever I can, even though sometimes it is 50 degrees outside. So the Dubai's RTA, which is the Road and Transport Authority, has recently revealed plans for net zero emissions by decarbonizing their entire fleet. They have set certain targets to reach by 2030, 2035, and then eventually to reach net zero by 2050, in line with the UAE's commitment to the net zero by 2050 initiative. This is going to happen across the entire fleet, from taxis to limousines, public buses, school buses, but then also a big retrofit and investment in their commercial buildings to achieve near zero energy consumption, putting solar panels or different renewable technology on their buildings and eliminating as much waste as they can. According to their studies or their projections, they are hoping that this strategy will result in reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 10 million tons and would save them 3.3 billion dirhams.
Wow. I mean, it's great that there is that level. I think certainly at a federal level, at that kind of governmental level, and here within Dubai, taking those kind of green initiatives, it sets the tone for the world that we live in around us to try and aim for something that's positive, or in this instance, net zero, which is fantastic. And I also think that there's a lot of opportunities here. There's the creation of those vehicles. Is there an opportunity perhaps within the UAE to produce some of those electric or hydrogen vehicles that the RTA said? A lot of vehicles are imported from around the world. Perhaps one of those steps, the next step, is perhaps some entrepreneurs here within the region to actively go out and produce some of these EVs. Now, one company that is looking at EVs with a lot of detail is Volkswagen, VW. They've tried to crack the American market a number of times. The US, one of the big sort of world's biggest car markets, and they've decided to bring back this heritage brand. Now I have to say I'd never heard of this heritage American brand. Maybe it was a little before my time, I'm not sure. But they acquired the rights to a company called Scout, and they are looking to produce vehicles particularly for the American market under this marquee Scout brand, which is set to go into production in 2026. And they're going to build a $2 billion factory, which is going to make 200,000 EVs a year. This brand apparently existed from 1961 to 1980. It's famously associated with off-road vehicles in America, and they've already put, I think, plans for things like SUVs and off-roaders onto the table. Now, the interesting thing to me was they look pretty cool.
They look very cool.
I looked at it and I thought, hey, do you know what? Regardless of the name, the styling on this looks really cool. I would want to get one of these vehicles. They really are cool.
So I think there are two models that have been announced, and they're going to go into production by 2026. One is the SUV, and the other is what the Americans call a truck, or a pickup, so an open bed, flatbed in the back. But they look really, really cool. And I think you, even given the kind of environment, you saw Hummer, very exciting EV vehicle that they took out. It has that party trick where it can crab crawl, so it can crab crawl out of traffic. That
really?
I
haven't seen that one.
It does. It can crab crawl. I think it's perfect for UAE traffic, the way people drive on the road.
The way that we saw 4 lanes of traffic, all trying to get across into the same single lane for junctions. Yeah.
And then you've
just
got
crab crawl across.
Yeah, you've got the Rivian, again, a huge success story in the US. People around the world are trying to get their hands on them. And then obviously you have the much awaited Cybertruck, which I guess still hasn't been delivered yet. Besides all the hype.
Yeah, look, I think the disruption within the automobile market is pretty interesting. But whether the likes of VW, which is obviously huge, Ford, they still dominate production. A lot of these sort of marquee heritage companies, the big automobile producers, they're still dominant when it comes to the delivery of vehicles off the chain. And obviously the difference with like Tesla's valuation is that Tesla really isn't an automobile company. It's a software company. They are going to get to a point where they want mass adoption of Teslas, much like they've done with, say, Apple products, Apple iPhones, to get people to have them in their possession so that you can then upsell them other things. And that's what Tesla's trying to do. Some of the old school players are still very much competing in we build cars, and that's what they really want to focus on. I mean, it'd be fascinating to know, because I have my doubts about whether people want to pay subscriptions for technology like self-driving. You know, is self-driving even going to take off? I think this is one of those things where it's been promised, right? People have promised self-driving, and this is, well, everyone's going to want self-driving. Oh, isn't that an amazing technology?
Yeah.
I think it could be like a Betamax. I think it could be one of those technologies where it's like, oh, this is fantastic.
Yeah.
But people are like, actually, I don't want it. I want something else. I want to drive my own car. I don't trust the machines. I'm gonna drive it myself. And you know, maybe there is a little bit of that where people are like, well, there might be a bit of backlash against self-driving. Everything's being done for me. I've got AI writing all of my stuff for me. I've got going home and all that. You know, I don't even need to buy my own food out of the fridge anymore because the fridge orders it when it gets low. I think there could be pushback when it comes to technology in the future, not just with electric vehicles, but pushback against technology to be like, hey, I'm going to be that rogue. I'm going to be the maverick. I'm going to go and drive my own car. I'm going to order my own things off the internet.
Yeah, but I think that is interesting. I don't know if self-driving is going to be the promise that, you know, that gets people excited about. Like, I remember growing up, the Jetsons had me believing that we were going to be in flying cars by now, right? But what I think quite interesting about this Volkswagen story is these creations and development of these really kind of unique, niche, exciting brands, like Scout, bringing this back, like the Rivian. I think it's really, really interesting that you're having these kind of smaller, really exciting projects come out where they get to kind of push and play outside of their boundaries, and you know, more of like a direct-to-consumer approach when it comes to car brands. So I'm quite excited to see how this plays out. But talking of electric vehicles, I think one of the things that I found really interesting, and this comes from a personal anecdote. A friend of mine a few months ago switched over from a Mercedes to a Tesla, and you know, I jokingly tease her all the time that essentially her, you know, she doesn't want to meet up, or she picks certain places that we meet up now based on where's the closest EV charging station.
Makes sense.
So I kind of looked at it, and we were talking about obviously the decarbonization, what RTA's announced, VW, rising car sales for EVs. So there's this thing called range anxiety, and this was a survey done well, the only data that's available is from the US as of now, and some in Germany.
So this is like being one of those paper targets at the end of a gun range.
Exactly. Except it's people deciding how and when and where they go based on what they feel like the car can do, or the car's capability.
Oh, a very, very different range anxiety then.
Yeah. So in the US, Forbes, with one poll, they did a survey, and it was close to 60%. 60% of people who owned electric vehicles were deterred from taking a trip or it caused them to rearrange their travel plans because they just weren't sure that they would actually make it there.
So it's another case of technology shaping the way that we live and play.
Yeah. So bringing it back to the UAE, I was kind of looking at it. The UAE EV market is projected to grow at 30%, right, in the next 5 years. As per Gartner, they specified that 6 million electric cars were shipped to the UAE in 2022, which represents a 200% rise in demand for EVs. According to a 2022 statement from DEWA, part of their Green Charger initiative, there are 325 charging stations across Dubai, right? So 6 million EV cars in 2022, 325 charge stations. So that's around 560 charge points in the city. Are there enough charging stations for all of these cars?
Yeah, but I think that's obviously going to change as we have more and more adoption. It's inevitable. I saw one the other day. I was driving past Dragon Mart, and there's this new Enoch petrol station, and I was driving up to it. I turned to my wife, and I was like, oh, because we actually needed to stop at a petrol station.
You Flintstones.
And I was driving up to it, and I was like, I was just sort of driving along, and I looked at it, and I was like, getting closer and closer and closer to this Enoch station, and I could see it, and I was like, that doesn't look like
so futuristic, right? Yeah,
I can fill my car up. But no, obviously the front of it was all electric charging points. I presume there was a typical petrol or diesel sort of tanks the other side, but it just didn't look like a typical fuel station. So I missed the turn. I didn't go in because I was, this definitely isn't a fuel station. And then, oh yeah, it is. As I drove past, I was like, I could see the charging points. I was like, oh, that's actually pretty smart. It's pretty slick. But I didn't really realize it was somewhere I could fill my car. And maybe that's the point. It's really aimed at those people who've got electric cars. And I think when you've if you invest in an electric car, you've kind of got to change your infrastructure to meet it. Clearly there is a perception from these big typical fuel stations. This is an opportunity, right? This is an opportunity for us to capture them. And maybe there's also a private sector opportunity here. Build wherever there's a charge point. Hey, you've got opportunity because people are going to want to
100%. But look, this was a US survey, and US is a mature EV market, and they've got a massive EV charging network. And in 2021, that same survey, the number one concern was the price, the purchase price of an EV car. That was pushed down to number 2, and number 1 was range anxiety. I think people are unclear about the capabilities of the car. But I'd leave it up. I'd love to ask the audience, anyone who's listening to Aeolian Sands, if you do own an EV car, or you have a friend or a family member that owns an EV car, we'd love to know how often, or if they ever do, or if you have a funny anecdote about range anxiety affecting your plans.
Or if your electric car has stopped in the middle of the road because you've run out of juice, just like my phone always runs out of charge. Obviously, love to hear your thoughts. We're on Instagram. We're duke_mir, and on TikTok we are at Aeolian Sands. And coming up shortly, we'll hear about some clever new developments in construction. Bringing up the rear of this week's program is a concrete block. And this section gets weirder and weirder every single episode. We've gone from radioactivity to rubber, and now we're gobbling up carbon dioxide with bricks. Mir, talk to me.
Yeah, so this was a really nice article I read in TechCrunch a few weeks ago. I don't follow the NBA. I know you do. So I don't know, maybe this is good timing to talk about this, but apparently there's a former NBA star. His name is Rick Fox. He is an investor and a co-founder of a startup that is looking to change the way we build things.
So background, Rick Fox, former Boston and LA Lakers player. He won 3 NBA championships, and he played with Shaq. So he's pretty cool in my book. He's also gone on and he's got a ridiculously long list of B-list movies as an actor. And I went through them. I genuinely, it's a huge list, and I hadn't heard of most of them. But he was in 4 episodes of One Tree Hill, which, funnily enough, was very basketball focused. So I assume he was in it for that reason.
Yeah, and the reason I was interested in this is because I think it could potentially be a very interesting business that could support the region here, and yeah, we may want to work with Mr. Rick Fox. So
shout out.
He Got Game was a really good movie. I loved Rick Fox and He Got Game. Yeah.
Yeah. You. Oh yeah. Sorry. Now I know it. Now I know where we're heading. Oh God, that Rick Fox. He starred in some incredible films. He's a top actor. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't get the memo on that one.
All right. Okay. Quickly telling the audience about what this startup is. It's called Pertana. Very interesting. Clearly, Rick Fox is quite a smart gentleman. They recently secured a $12 million pre-seed investment. So essentially what they do is they make concrete that avoids and removes carbon dioxide, right? So everything from carbon avoidance in terms of the production of the actual cement, but also removal credits in return, which can be purchased. So it's quite interesting. Cement is the kind of thinking or the background or the context of this is cement's the most widely used substance after water. The global cement industry is responsible for emitting 8% of the total carbon footprint. Construction is obviously a very carbon intensive industry, and that's what Pertana is trying to change with their unique formulation. Or I don't know how unique it is, but this is the first one that I heard about. And what's really interesting is that they have a special mixture of natural and recycled ingredients. So essentially cement, when producing cement, it emits a lot of heat and therefore a lot of carbon dioxide. So it's actually it produces a lot of CO2. But what they do is they use 2 byproducts of other manufacturing processes and industries, which helps them reduce the processing costs. There's less heat emitted. And those 2 products, the key ingredients are brine and slag. And that's why I thought it was so interesting. Brine, as we know, is a byproduct of desalination plants, that really salty water that comes out, which needs to be treated before it's put back into the ocean or into other water sources. So this chemical reaction that takes place, it removes CO2. That concrete removes CO2 from the air, just like a tree.
That's amazing. And there are other technologies which do similar to this. So one of the companies called Heirloom Carbon Technologies, they did a partnership with a company called Central Concrete, and between the 2 of them, what they did was they used rocks to capture CO2 from the air. This is in San Francisco. And then what they essentially did was they took all the CO2 that was captured from these rocks and they ground it down and incorporated the gas directly into the concrete. So they injected it into the concrete. And it's meant to last centuries, this concrete, and therefore capture it for a long period of time, much, I guess, like trees might do. The UAE actually has something. Earlier this year, they did a workshop around cement and concrete decarbonisation, which was organised by the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, and they said that the UAE carbon footprint is 10%. It's 10% of building materials and transportation of those materials. So a tenth of the what's happening across the UAE, the carbon footprint of the whole country is made up of that sort of construction and building materials industry. So actually addressing it with incredible moves from these fascinating tech startups
Yeah.
could go a long way to addressing the concerns of carbon dioxide, both from the environment and making sure that the process of building as well is reduced.
It's very exciting, even not only in the UAE, but even other parts of the region, Saudi Arabia, massive, huge giga projects, construction taking place. Essentially, any technology that turns concrete into a CO2 sponge, where it's continuously taking out carbon dioxide from the environment, and then also because it's an ongoing sponge, it continues to collect CO2. It allows people or organizations like us to be able to invest and buy those carbon credits, right? So I think it's a really nice kind of story, and I'm really excited to see what Pertana gets up to and how they progress on their journey.
That's it for this week's program. Thank you so much for spending time to listen to it all. We obviously know you have very busy lives, so it's a real honor that you could join us. One thing before you go, give us a like on Spotify, upvote it across all of your platforms, help to get the podcast trending and build this lovely little community of Aeolian Sands. You can follow us at duke_mir on Instagram and at Aeolian Sands on TikTok. We'll catch you next time, which, if you've got this on autoplay, is in 3, 2,